What Did I Say with Dan Rothenberg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first video broadcast of What Did I Say? I have decided to expand to YouTube so I can connect with as many of you as possible so we can talk about connecting and communicating with our teenagers and young adults. This is my office. That's the couch people lay on, and I shrink them. I'm very excited about this episode. I'm interviewing Michael the Chairman. Michael the Chairman is a very inspiring young man of 24 who has been wheelchair bound since he was born, hence the Michael the Chairman. So he's facing his challenges with humor and resiliency. And I met him. He's a stand-up comedian, YouTuber, podcaster, everything, or very positive voice online and on stage. I met him at Helium Comedy Club, where we were both doing Portland's funniest comedy contest. And he is going to talk to us about his experiences with bullying and gaming, video game playing, which really have a positive and helpful message how we can address those issues with our kids, because they're actually kind of controversial issues. There is no one way to do it, and he makes some really interesting points. Michael was born with infantile Marfan syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, and he's been through so much. It's just amazing just to talk to him. He has connective tissue disorder, wheelchair since he was born. Since then, he's had 2 open heart surgeries, 3 spine surgeries, 8 eye surgeries, an additional heart surgery, and a partridge in a pear tree. The additional heart surgery, why did I single that one out? Because let's see, they had to kill him, clinically stop his heart, and then start it again. So he's been dead. That's my definition of a survivor. That you run into that guy at the party, he gets the floor. He has been dead. Also, he was legally blind until he was 20. And not to bury the lead, or would it be the opposite? It was before he could see he became an amazing video game player. I'm not going to tell you, let him tell you about it. Amazing guy. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it's Michael the Chairman.
For 20 years, I was legally blind. And then I had 8 eye surgeries, and now I'm not blind anymore. I have a lot of other vision complications, but I'm no longer blind. And while I was blind, I was one of the best in the world at some video games. So I had a reason to keep going. I was actually honestly a little worse after I got not blind. when I got all the surgeries, which was weird. But I was still really good.
Okay.
Yeah, I was still
You were
really
worse
good.
at video games after you.
A little bit, but I think
sight.
it was because I stopped caring. I started to realize there's so much more opportunity, and you don't have to be trapped like this. I convinced myself that, you're blind, you're crippled. Your only way out is by playing video games and making a career here because you can do it at home and you're good at it. This is a pathway forward.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started to see things more clearly, literally and metaphorically, I was like, this is wasting my life. I know I have so much more potential inside of me, and I'm not expressing it. And it drove me crazy not to be who I really am. And I'm just stuck in the simulation of another being's creation of video games. And I was a broadcaster too on Twitch. And that's what really kept me going, is because I got to talk to people and interact with them. That's what I really loved. And once I made that distinction of, I don't really love playing video games, I love talking to people. And once I realized that, I'm like, I have to stop this. And because video games are a dopamine addiction, it took me a little bit to quit. But once I did make that decision, I made sure I did it.
And do you feel like, so what do you say to young people that are gaming, let's say hours every day?
I would say a couple hours a day, or even I would say recommend more a couple hours a week is not unhealthy. It can be fun,
Mhm.
especially when you're doing it with friends and you can still bond with your friends playing games. But when you're doing it like 6 to 10 hours a day or more, which is like those extremes have been normalized in my generation. Everyone I know plays that much and
Mhm.
they don't even focus on their potential outside of it.
Mhm.
And it's a definite problem. So you have to decide within yourself, am I going to avoid the reality of the potential inside me and avoid the work it takes to be my best self by playing games all day, or am I going to chase my dreams? And for some people, your dreams are being a pro at video games, right? And if you
Uh-huh.
genuinely have that talent and you want to do that, then you should go for it. But you have to realize that's a job too. And some of my
Uh-huh.
friends who I played with were amazing at certain video games and some of the best in the world at those specific ones. But they weren't
Mhm.
willing to take it seriously, to take it to the next level and make a career out of it. But they talked about it a lot. They had the talent, but they just talked and they never really did anything with it. So if you're serious about being a pro at video games, you got to do that like a job.
What I what I think is so helpful about, in part, about what you're saying is, um, you're not just for parents, is that gaming can take on a lot of different roles, and it's important to not just um, not just manage your child's screen time, but to also get to know exactly what they're doing. There are some creative things that can be done online. There are some competitive, positive things
There are, and especially if
involved
you're disabled,
in the game.
if you're
Yeah.
disabled and you can't play sports, that is your sport. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying to take and deprive your child of all video games. I'm just saying you do need balance, as everyone knows, in your
Mhm.
life. And in society, the extremes have been normalized, and we have to get away from that. It's not healthy
Mhm.
for anything
Mhm.
to play that much or do that much of one thing.
Right. So yeah. So 13 hours of gaming does not replace life.
Which sounds obvious, but that is a reality of today.
Uh-huh. And do you think for parents it's also important to realize that we have normalized this as a society? So, maybe try not to judge your kids, try to talk to them.
Yeah,
It's understandable
judging never
that.
works. Judging never works. You gotta develop an understanding, I believe, with your child so that they understand why you are concerned and make them aware of the
Mhm.
consequences and explain down the road what their future will be like. And a lot of the time, they have to go through it themselves to fully understand. When you
Mhm.
explain things to people and they don't have that form of understanding, at least in another part of their life, they can't make the comparison and make the change. Like I've had people, you know, I've had many times in my life where I try and explain what it's like to be disabled and they just can't comprehend it until
Mhm.
they got in an accident and broke their leg and had like a cast and stuff and had to be in a wheelchair for a month or whatever. And they're like, I just got a little taste and a glimpse and I'm
Uh-huh.
starting to understand more, but there's no way I could have really understood what you go through on a day-to-day basis.
What advice you have for parents who their children have disabilities, and that's what's going on, that's what's in the cards.
I would
What
say I would say laugh with them.
Mm.
Laughter is just, the cliche of laughter is the best medicine, but it is so true. It's how you heal and get over everything. If I didn't laugh with myself, I mean, I'd be dead. I wouldn't have the will to keep going. I
Uh-huh.
mean, comedians, like they give you drugs in the hospital. when you're at home, comedians are the drug for me that kept me alive, and writing and making myself laugh in times of complete despair just kept me that 1% more I needed to keep going for the next day. So I'd say laugh with
Yeah.
your kids, joke about the disabilities. Like kids with disabilities like to be made fun of too, in a kind
Uh-huh.
way.
Uh-huh.
You know, the worst thing you can do is let them be excluded.
Yeah.
I was always excluded in I'm if I told you some of the stories, you'd be like, sue the school a million times over. I'm
And I'm not surprised.
yeah.
The system is not set up for so much. Schools are not set up.
Yes, systemically, but also just decisions people again, people in positions of power make. They're not, in my experience, they're not usually just. There's some people, it's either the person that will go out of their way for you for anything and care so deeply about everyone around them, or it's the person that usually I encounter just indifference and or, which sounds weird, outgoing hate towards people with disabilities.
Mhm.
Like a purposeful hate and disdain for people with disabilities. Like a form of racism, essentially. Like it's people are like, what? What are you talking? No one would ever do something like that to you. What are you talking about? I've never seen anything like that. I'm like, oh, I can tell you. Like, happens all the time. I
Tell
can,
us how that shows itself. What does that look like?
I mean, okay, well, so many stories. One, this is a this is a story not necessarily of outgoing hate, but maybe ignorance mixed with just kind of like get away from me. So
Mhm.
when I was a freshman in high school, I had a friend who was on the football team, and he knew I always wanted to be included and outgoing and stuff. And he
Mhm.
recommended to me, he's like, "Hey, we don't have a hype guy this year for the football team." And he's like, "Michael, you're funny and everything. You should go out there and get the crowd hyped up before the game." And I was like, "Yeah, I could definitely do that." And so I went to go see the head football coach, and I asked him, my friend, who I said his name, who's like the best player on the team at the time
Mhm.
and the biggest player on the team. and,
Mhm.
he recommended and thought that you would be into me doing this, like being the hype guy. And he's
Mhm.
like, well, Michael, we don't really want someone like you to represent our school. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we're trying to portray an image of strength, and you portray an image of weakness. And I was like, you're okay. I get what you are. I knew immediately where it was going. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Forget it. I don't want to do this if you're in here anyways with this. I don't want to be involved because I knew when I try and force myself and be involved with people that don't want me, even if I could probably go up someone above him and force it to happen
Mhm.
from it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, but I don't want
Right.
to be with that. So I'm
Right.
like, I let it go and I'm like, whatever. And I left his office and I went back to health class. Class started because I did it during break. And of course, my name gets called over the intercom to go to the principal's office. And everyone's like, oh, what did Michael do? I'm like, whatever. So I get up and get in my wheelchair and I go to open the door. And the principal and the coach are standing right there at the door waiting for me. And the principal's like, look, he didn't mean it like that. And I'm like,
You're
look,
like
I
covering
know
his ass immediately,
immediately. Because I think
protecting
the coach
himself.
realized, oh shit, what did I do? And so I'm like,
Oh,
I told the principal, I was like,
you know,
look, I know what you're doing. He's like, you do? I'm like, yeah, you don't want to get sued. He's like,
mhm.
yeah. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to do this anymore anyways. Okay.
Mhm.
Cause I knew like I could have, and I was a trailblazer for several other things for handicapped people in high school. But I was like, do I want to pick this battle to
Mhm.
be the hype guy for, I'm like, not really. This isn't something I'm extremely into. It isn't vital, for now. So I was just like, look, I don't want to be involved. Forget it. And then I closed the door on them and I went back to class. It was so weird to me to encounter adult bullies because I had the idea that once you grow up, you mature out of that stuff. But as I got older and older, I realized, oh, a lot of adults are even worse than kids. This doesn't
Yes.
get better. People who don't reflect and heal themselves, they get worse.
And here's the amazing thing. They're often teachers, social workers,
Yeah.
somehow
I've encountered people who work with disabilities who are just the opposite of that. And you're like, you're working with kids with disabilities where it takes time and patience and,
yes.
you know, what's the word? Compassion? Like, and they're
That's
just
a
like the
whole-
meanest people. Yeah.
That's a whole other episode we need to have on one of our podcasts. The adult bullying of vulnerable kids who you're getting paid to take care of. And I believe there's a psychology that goes into it. I've seen it. And it
Mhm.
there's a number of factors
Yeah.
involved, including doing a job that's sort of impossible and not being set up for success. Not that that's an excuse at all.
Mhm. Well, part of me would always feel when someone was mean to me, I just inherently knew that there was something at the root of the problem, that this isn't really about me, it's about them. But I still had to experience the anger and I would internalize it, even though I knew it wasn't really about me. And I still had to defend myself because I was in the situation that they were putting me in. But I had that higher, it was a blessing and a curse because I always had this higher understanding of knowing why everyone was doing everything they were doing, like their motivations. It's always been inherent to me. I could always figure that stuff out. But I had to go through the process of what their anger and hatred was, even though I knew that I could probably even heal it if they would give me a chance to talk to them. And a lot of the time, this is one story to get off teachers. There was a kid who would bully me, who we were kind of, friends a little bit, and then he started to be meaner and meaner. And one day in Spanish class, I would always sit in the front row because I was blind, so it gave me the best chance to see the PowerPoint presentation, even though it got like pronounced to see in front of me. So I was in the front row, and he came in, and he saw me in the front row. Class was just starting, so he came in. I had my Spanish homework in front of me, ready to turn it in, and he grabbed it, and it was like a big assignment too. And he ripped it all up in front of me and threw it on the floor. And I'm like, okay, well, that just happened. And then the teacher came over. Sorry, I keep going back and forth, but back to the teacher bullying. She came over and she's like, "Where's your homework, Michael?" And I'm like, "You know where it is. It's on the floor. It happened right in front of her." And she's like, "Looks like you're getting an F today." So that was fun. That was a whole nother issue I had to deal with.
What?
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
sounds absurd. Yeah, yeah.
but
So
let me ask you.
hold on, let me stay with the kid. Let me stay with
Go
what
ahead.
happens. Yeah.
Sorry.
So over the next couple of years, that was in 8th grade because I took Spanish early. I was advanced. So so over the next 4 years, by the time I was a junior in high school, I had the same kid in my chemistry class. And in that time that had passed, he bullied me a couple more times, but we hadn't spoken in a while, right? And he sat more towards the back. I was always in the front. And I think it might have been the final exam or something. And chemistry was kind of hard at that time. It was a lot of math, and you needed a calculator. And I finished mine early. And the teacher has extra calculators just in case not everyone has one or couldn't bring one or forgot it. And he gave them all out to people. And the kid that used to bully me, he didn't get one because the teacher was out and he didn't bring one. And because I finished early, and he was just sitting there because he couldn't do his test. And I finished early, and I was like, what if I gave him my calculator? And I did it out of compassion, but I'd say 75% curiosity. I was like, what if I showed someone love who treated me like shit for years? I was just so curious to see what would happen.
Mhm.
And I transferred to my power chair and I handed my calculator and I didn't say anything. And he just looked at me and he couldn't believe it. And I waited after class for him to finish and he gave it back to me. And we talked after class for maybe a half an hour. And he just apologized for everything. And he said his parents were getting a divorce at the time and he
Mhm.
didn't know how to handle it. You know, I was the weakest kid, obviously, physically for retaliation, even though I got in a lot of fistfights. But
Mm.
like, uh, he's, he's like, I knew I could do that to you and you probably weren't going to do anything. So I did it and I'm sorry. And you didn't deserve that. And we had a
Oh, it's
nice
beautiful.
long talk. And I think we both gained a lot from that day. And I'm very glad I did it and established me in a pattern of taking that leap of faith and doing things, even though it was hard for me to overcome that anger. And I had a little bit of that fear of just approaching someone who had done that to me. But I knew it was the right thing to do. And whenever I
Mhm.
know something is the right thing to do, I always make sure I do it. So,
Oh, that's really that's amazing. And I think it's important to point out, first of all, I love you went with curiosity.
I was real
Life
curious. Yeah.
life opens up when we kind of go toward curiosity, and the fact that he knew you weren't doing it to be walked on and to get his approval. You were doing the right thing,
Yeah. I think he
following
knew
your
instantly.
value.
That I think he knew because he was stunned at first that because he knew what he had done to me, you
Uh-huh.
know, he knew how he would bully me and stuff. And I think he was just someone showing him kindness when he had done
Mhm.
something, so many things that were mean that I
Mhm.
think it changed him that day.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, all of these stories, it kind of reminds me of something. I work with a number of kids, junior high and high school kids that go to school and get bullied in various different ways, and their parents don't really know how to deal with it because usually a lot of advice that parents give is ignore them, stay out of trouble. But the problem with that is sometimes in the ignoring, you're swallowing that shame. You're not, we have to stand up for ourselves one way or the other. And I've done it on a yoga mat with kids. The idea of we'll do some yoga. The idea that you need to occupy space in your school.
Hmm.
You need to be a part of your school. That's not for you to go and tolerate and get shit on and get through it.
You should never shrink away, right? You should
Yes.
never shrink away. What I would say is what I found bullies hate most is love because
Uh,
that's what they're scared of the most. And
uh-huh.
when you show an act of kindness to someone that's doing acts of hatred, they can't handle it. And it confuses
Uh-huh.
the hell out of them. And that's what I found to repel bullies the most. I mean, in certain situations that are really tense and you don't have time to do that or something, you know, where I've gone in fights, you got to do what you got to do and defend yourself. But if you
Uh-huh.
can really get over that hump of fear of showing love to someone who's mean to you, it'll
Uh-huh.
change their life and it'll change your life. And it'll set you both in a new pattern that is just better for everyone. And it'll have a
I
ripple
would,
effect in everyone in your future as well.
it's funny. And there's these little moments we have when we're young that change our life.
Hmm.
Um,
Definitely.
I've never admitted this. This just occurred to me. I don't I don't label myself as a bully. I don't think I was labeled as a bully. But here and there I was a little shit
Yeah.
in school. Just whatever, doing things to get attention. And I forgot there was this kid named Eli. And I don't know what I was saying, right? But I'm talking my shit, God knows what. Eli turns to me and goes, "You know, Danny, I was Danny back then. Danny, that is a really nasty thing to say. Sometimes you're a really nasty person. You know that? And I I took it in, I apologized, and I think I changed.
Just when you hear that moment
You
of raw
Yes,
truth that you can't
yes,
deny because on a certain level,
yes,
like, oh, what I did was not nice, and you know it,
yes.
and you get called out on something that is true. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. I mean, I've even experienced that before when I'm, you know, not in a good mood or something. I'm like, yeah, why am I acting like this right now?
Right.
Just that moment of self-reflection. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll never forget. I'll never forget that. He honestly and unafraid looked at me, gave me truth.
Mhm. And it's
Um,
and you still remember it. So it was
yeah,
obviously impactful.
yeah, I do
Yeah.
remember it. Um,
And sometimes bullies need more help than the victims, which I know a
yeah.
lot of people are like, "Oh, you shouldn't say things like that." Listen, I think a certain amount of bullying is good, a certain level to build resilience.
Mhm.
It can't get to obviously levels that are physical for the most part and extreme psychological abuse, but people do need to tease each other. And for what a real bully needs is to be sat down and find out, right, as a therapist, I'm sure like you need to get to the root of why they're being a bully. And usually they're missing something, which is love.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Um, we all, especially, the problem is, I think the reality is, in the process of this self-awareness and development, bullies can do some damage. They can
Yeah,
they
definitely.
can mess kids up, and I agree, we need bullying in the sense that life is, to the extent that that's life. Life is filled with conflict, and we need to learn to stand up for ourselves, and we can't be overly sheltered. Um, and at the same time, this is the message. I've run groups for bullying, and I've dealt with bullying. One way or the other, a child needs to handle it. If a kid is getting bullied, it's the child needs to handle it one way or the other themselves, ideally with assertive language and not their fist.
Hmm.
Sometimes it might come to that. And what I think, and I'd like to know what you think, what I think parents miss is you can't just trust the system,
Never
because
do
then
that.
you're not growing. Do you know what I
uh,
mean?
yeah.
It's a such a hard lesson for our children to learn, but it's a part of growth, confidence and growth, to be
Well,
able to handle that.
if you always have someone stepping in to fight your battles, it
Mhm.
takes away your confidence.
Right.
At least it did for me. Like when people would step in and told me, well, a better example of like when people told me with my disabilities, Michael, you can't do this with your
Uh-huh.
disability. You're not capable of doing this. I hated that mindset, but I let people keep telling me that and then doing stuff for me that I wanted to learn to do myself to be self reliant. And I would feel robbed in that moment of my confidence, my dignity. And throughout time, I would be robbed of the ability to actually learn to do whatever I needed to do. Same thing goes in life when you're interacting with people. And when you're young, you got to build those skills. So if you have parents always stepping in for you or higher up in the school or something, and you don't
Mhm.
solve it yourself, you're going to
Mhm.
establish that pattern for the rest of your life, and it's going to be hard to break down the road.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I am, as I'm sure all of my listeners, and by the way, I think I might be up to 6 now, so I'm getting there,
Yeah, yeah.
but, I am excited to see how your career and your life unfolds, and I know it's gonna be great. It
Oh, thank you,
I
Dan.
can I can see it, I can feel it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm trying my hardest. So,
Yeah, you're welcome, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Michael.
And we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Amazing guy. Let's start with gaming, which is it's a touchy subject. I've put some videos out talking about the dangers of excessive gaming. I've gotten a lot of responses back from young people like, dude, you're just a boomer. You don't know what you're talking about. By the way, I'm not a boomer. I am a Gen Xer. There's a difference. I still got my hair. This was once a mullet. It totally kicked ass. Bruh. Anyway, but I understand. And what I take from that is young people, regardless, don't want to be judged. And a lot of what I see working with parents is it's not just the difficulty with setting limits with screen time. It's the fact that we're judging them. And there's a lot of sort of get off your phone, get off that without recognizing any value to it. And if you think about it, this is the world our children have grown up on. There is some skill involved, and there is various levels of creativity with different activities they're doing on their screens and on their Twitches. And I know I'm sounding old now because and on their Atari and their Nintendo because I know I don't know what I'm talking about. I get it. And so it's my job, clearly, and all of our jobs as parents to the best of our ability, take a little bit of an interest, get to know the difference between Twitch and Xbox. Because I know there's a difference that I'm going to figure out myself. Sometimes, like Michael said, if your child wants to become a professional gamer and they're really, really good and they're putting in the work, that's different than just zoning out doing a video game for 13 hours with no goal in mind. So the less we judge them, the more we might be able to connect with them and not push them away. That being said, yeah, we have to set certain reasonable limits because it is unhealthy to spend more time on a video game, I would say, than in real life. We need real life to update this computer, new experiences. And now on to bullying. I love the part where Michael talked about how he made that gesture of love to a bully. That was so heartwarming, and it was like perfect. It was like a Hallmark movie unfolding in front of me. And what I want to add to that was that gesture of love to that bully was actually a very assertive, strong move on Michael's part because he was taking control of the situation. He took the narrative away from the bully and made it his own. And one way or the other, we want to do our best to help our kids stand up to the bully. Michael stood up to him with love. So the point is, one way or the other, ideally, we want to help our children meet the bully head on or handle it so they can grow in their confidence, as opposed to swallow the shame and lack of self-esteem, because that's what a bully is doing. He's stealing your self-esteem. Now, I think it's really important to mention that Michael clearly has always been a very confident person. He knows who he is. That's his strongest protective factor. He was able to say to that coach, forget it, I don't want to be on your team. He didn't cower and feel bad about himself. The coach says, your weakness, and then he didn't go home and internalize that and say, God, I am weak. He was like, F you. Now, what do we do when our kids don't have that confidence? And that's often the case when kids are having trouble with bullies. They're sort of like emotional low-hanging fruit. I was a little like that when I was young. Michael's interesting because he's physically low-hanging fruit, but emotionally high-hanging fruit. But when that's the case, I suggest that try to help your kid build their confidence. That's where Taekwondo, self-defense, a shrink or a resiliency coach like myself, helping them with eye contact, helping them, anything to help them become physically confident, that can be really important. Working on things like assertive language, teaching your kids the difference between assertive and aggressive. Assertive is direct, strong, and honest. Aggressive is emotionally dysregulated and impulsive. What I see sometimes is parents, really well-intentioned, telling their kids to just avoid the bully. So the kid is scared, doesn't want to go to school, and we say to that kid, well, go walk down a different hall to avoid the bully and avoid trouble, which is understandable because you don't want your kid to get in trouble with the no tolerance policy. Everybody gets in trouble. That's a whole other podcast and issue. But when all we do is teach our kids to avoid trouble, they don't grow, they don't build that confidence, and the bullying continues to wear away at them. Let me know what you think. whatsayme43@gmail.com. Really, I really want your feedback. This is a discussion. I am not an expert here. And they're really, these are fluid discussions and controversial issues. But I have worked with a lot of kids and I've run bully groups. And I would say, ideally, your kid is dealing with it one way or the other. It doesn't mean fighting, but it might mean that if it's self-defense. I don't have time to get to your emails today. I've gotten some great comments on Facebook, and we'll get to those next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Michael, the chairman. It's been a great video episode. We'll see you next time.